So apparently Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast on Spotify, and he's repeatedly spread COVID misinformation and invited guests on to do the same.
Went from Walter Cronkite, basically, to this guy Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons. I checked it. He believes in dragons. He believes in dragons.
Did you triple force that?
Yes, I did. And he also thinks that dragons, like dinosaur type of animals, roamed the earth when people did.
Worried about losing your job, and you're worried about podcasts taking over, and who's the source of news, and we said Donald Trump was Hitler, but half the country disagreed with us, and he won, and this is and Joe Rogan believes in dragons.
Joe Rogan was minding his own business, enjoying his protein-packed life of elk meat and kettlebells, when the View crossed the line one too many times. What started as a petty insult spiraled into a media war that now threatens to bring daytime television to its knees. The moment Joy Behar smirked and mocked Rogan on national TV, the tone changed instantly. "Trust us," she said. "We're backed by ABC News. Not like Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons." The studio audience laughed, but behind the scenes, the countdown to legal destruction had already started. Rogan didn't waste time complaining online or throwing passive-aggressive tweets. He did what no one expected. He hit back with a $100 million defamation lawsuit that exploded through the entertainment world like a wrecking ball made of subpoenas. The lawsuit wasn't a bluff, and it wasn't symbolic. It was a full-force, facts-backed takedown that exposed The View for what Rogan's legal team called reckless and defamatory broadcasting.
That's why people like our show, because they know that we are checked by ABC News. But
We're checked by everybody.
Yeah, I mean, if we're wrong, we have, the legal note here.
The human legal.
I don't know these people. Hey, this is the most important part. This is right after she was saying, "We are run by ABC News. You should trust us, not Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons." So she by saying we should trust them because they're double checked by ABC News, and then making the stupidest f***ing statement. Like you didn't listen to what I said.
Yeah.
You didn't listen to what the wildlife biologist, and that's only a part of what he said.
I can't believe
the other
Joy
part of what he
Behar
said
didn't
was there was
weigh-
something before that where he was explaining encounters with giant reptiles.
Suddenly, those coffee-sipping conversations turned into evidence. Whoopi Goldberg sat frozen as the words legal liability echoed louder than any studio applause. Sunny Hostin's confidence cracked like glass as the complaint reached every major news outlet across the country. What was once a daily routine of hot takes and smug superiority turned into a courtroom crisis. The lawsuit named specific segments, quotes, and moments when Rogan's name had been dragged through the mud, all with zero factual basis. While Joy Behar rolled her eyes and dismissed Rogan as a dragon believer, he was quietly gathering timestamps, transcripts, and video receipts. He didn't roar. He struck with precision. Rogan's legal team argued that The View's repeated accusations weren't opinions. They were broadcast as facts to millions of viewers. And in the court of law, that's not free speech. It's defamation. ABC executives were caught off guard. Behind closed doors, the network was scrambling, reviewing hours of footage, desperately trying to figure out how it had come to this nightmare moment. The internet, of course, lost its mind. Memes flooded social media. Dragon Believer trended across platforms as Rogan leaned into the mockery and even updated his profile to read exactly that.
That show has this very specific ideological bubble in which they operate in, and they always bring on a token conservative woman and they yell over her and silence her, and they did that with Meghan McCain, and they did that with what is that other blonde woman from Survivor? Do you remember her, Jamie? She was always yelling. I mean, it's a bizarre show.
What started as an insult turned into one of the most expensive jokes ever made on live television. And the punchline? A $100 million lawsuit dropped like thunder across the media landscape. Even longtime fans of The View were stunned. The smugness, the dismissiveness, it was all catching up with them. For once, the ladies at the table weren't in control of the conversation. Joe Rogan didn't appear angry. He looked focused. On his next podcast episode, he calmly addressed the situation, exposing the wild claims made about him and showing exactly how they twisted his words. The worst part for The View? The clips were all public. The damage was already done. Millions had seen the segment, laughed at the joke, and walked away, believing Rogan was some conspiracy-loving madman. But the truth was far less amusing and far more dangerous for The View. They had accused a man with a massive global audience of spreading misinformation without a single verified fact to back it up. And now, the receipts were on the table. Rogan's lawyers made it clear. This wasn't an opinion. It was a smear campaign broadcast to millions. The kind of accusation that hits reputations like a wrecking ball. Sponsors began to panic. Brands started distancing themselves. Whispers filled ABC's offices as producers and legal teams met behind closed doors, trying to patch a ship that was already sinking. One producer reportedly said, "This was supposed to be a joke, not a lawsuit." But the damage was irreversible. When Rogan's team delivered the lawsuit, it came with a full report outlining every defamatory statement, line by line. While Rogan's audience rallied behind him, The View's fan base started to crack. Even those who never liked Rogan began asking the same question. Did they go too far this time? And the answer was clear. Yes, they did. The media didn't know what to do. Was this a scandal, a culture war, or just karma?
People want us divided, and they aren't just here in this country. They're foreign adversaries who are infiltrating our social media because it is prudent for us to stay that way. So when you see something that really pisses you off, you should triple check that one.
The bad information that's going out there.
Well, in defense, there are some really
But
good
it's possible that Donald Trump did roam the earth when dinosaurs were here.
There are some really good news kind of influencer types, and I think it's great that they're getting information about global and current events in front of younger people who maybe don't tune into traditional media. But to Sarah's point, there has to be some fact checking and actually verification of the things that are shared, because I spend a lot of time on Instagram Reels and I'm served up things that I get outraged about, and then I realize, oh, that's not even true.
Finally catching up to a show that had spent years treating opposing voices like punchlines. Either way, it was a full-blown crisis, and it wasn't going away. ABC's legal team went into overdrive. Emergency meetings, frantic calls, and red-marked transcripts filled every office from the writer's room to the executive suite. This wasn't just another media controversy. This was legal warfare, and Joe Rogan had just fired the first shot. The hosts of The View tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but the tension was unbearable. Whoopi looked distracted, barely holding on to her usual air of superiority. Sunny Hostin clutched her coffee cup like it was a lifeline. Joy kept cracking jokes, but none of them landed. Behind the scenes, sources say ABC was begging the hosts to tone it down. Don't mention Rogan, don't even say the word dragon, one producer allegedly shouted during a commercial break. But it was too late. The damage was spreading faster than they could control it. And Joe, he wasn't slowing down. On his podcast, he played the clip of Joy Behar mocking him on national TV. "I checked it. He believes in dragons," she had said. Rogan paused the clip and simply smiled before asking, "This is journalism." That moment went viral instantly. Millions watched as Rogan dismantled their attack with humor and precision. He didn't have to scream or rant. He just played their own words and let the public judge for themselves. People weren't laughing with The View anymore. They were laughing at them. Even comedians began to parody the situation. One sketch opened with a fake Joy Behar shouting, "Quick, "Someone sue the dragon," and it blew up across social media. As the pressure mounted, The View started changing their tone. Suddenly they were talking about free speech and opinions, backpedaling from the bold statements they'd made just days before. But the court doesn't care about convenient rewrites. Rogan's team released a public statement saying the lawsuit wasn't about silencing anyone. It was about restoring truth and demanding accountability from a show that weaponized misinformation under the mask of entertainment.
You know, just let's look at a scenario where the Supreme Court says, yes, he has all those rights. He is immune from everything.
Yeah.
You know what Joe Biden could do since he is presently president?
What?
Whoa. He could throw every Republican in jail.
Do you see what Whoopi Goldberg said?
What'd she say?
Whoopi Goldberg said that Biden could arrest all the Republicans and put them in jail. You just need to see how unhinged this kind of thinking is. Well, you know what Joe Biden could do? Joe Biden, you have to see it.
For years, The View had been accused of bullying their guests, especially conservative women. Now, they were getting a taste of what it felt like to be publicly challenged, and it wasn't pretty. A former guest who appeared on the show said, "They act like a sisterhood on camera, but behind the scenes, it's a battlefield." That quote hit headlines everywhere and only added fuel to the legal firestorm. Meanwhile, other media outlets began covering the lawsuit in depth. Analysts called it a defining moment in broadcast responsibility and said it could set a precedent for how daytime talk shows handle facts versus opinions. The public was divided but energized. Some called Rogan a hero for standing up to a biased media machine, while others nervously watched to see how far the case would go. But one thing was certain: everyone was paying attention. Viewership numbers started shifting. Rogan's podcast saw record-breaking streams, while The View's ratings began to dip. Advertisers noticed, and that sent another wave of panic across ABC's boardrooms. Sponsors weren't just worried about controversy, they were worried about liability. With Rogan's lawsuit looming, even brands that had supported The View for years began pulling back, issuing quiet pauses on contracts until things cooled down. But cooling down wasn't on the menu. Every day brought new headlines, new reactions, and new outrage. Joe Rogan wasn't just suing for money. He was dragging the entire show into the spotlight and demanding answers they couldn't give. When reporters reached out for comment, The View offered short, vague responses. "We're aware of the lawsuit," they said, but the silence behind the scenes was deafening. Fans started digging up past episodes, pointing out other times the hosts made bold claims without evidence. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Rogan anymore, it was about a pattern, a culture of unchecked arrogance masquerading as news. One legal expert warned that The View might be forced to settle, and fast. "If this goes to trial, it'll be a public disaster," she said. And judging by the reactions online, she wasn't wrong. Joy Behar's smirks were replaced by awkward silence. Sonny Hostin looked visibly shaken during recent broadcasts.
I agree that Joe Rogan is a horror. A horror.
I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify. He's got 11 million listeners. He's got a $100 million, contract as of 2020. But I do think as the podcast platform, you have to have some sort of guidelines. How about a disclaimer on his podcast that says, this is misinformation?
Whoopi tried to pivot to politics, but every word felt like it was walking on legal eggshells. The firestorm wasn't dying, it was growing. And now, even ABC's leadership had to face a harsh truth. Their flagship talk show had become a legal liability wrapped in daytime lipstick and noise. Behind the scenes, Disney, the parent company of ABC, was getting nervous. Executives were reportedly furious that a daytime show meant to entertain had triggered a legal disaster with a man who had one of the biggest microphones on the planet. Internal memos started circulating, warning producers to vet future segments more carefully. Avoid any mention of Rogan dragons or defamation until further notice, one anonymous employee claimed. The studio wasn't just rattled, it was in full retreat. And still, Joe Rogan wasn't backing down. His legal team pushed forward with confidence, releasing a detailed breakdown of their case to the press. It outlined every defamatory statement, every misleading claim, and every reckless comment aired about him. Rogan's fans took the fight to every platform. Clips of Joy Behar mocking him were now paired with legal commentary and furious reactions. This is what happens when you mock someone who actually reads the data, one user posted. And in the middle of it all, Joe stayed cool. He didn't scream. He didn't rant. He just sat behind his microphone, played their words back to the world, and let the truth do the damage. His calm dismantling of their mockery was more powerful than any outburst. Sponsors who had once proudly supported The View were now making quiet exits. Brand representatives didn't want their logos floating beside a show involved in a $100 million lawsuit. The fallout was no longer just legal, it was financial. Producers tried to pivot the show's tone, focusing on fluffier topics and healing conversations, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and audiences weren't in the mood for soft talk when accountability was overdue. One episode opened with a nervous Whoopi trying to laugh off the controversy, but the energy in the room had shifted.
Why doesn't The View have any trans women on it?
Great point. It has a lot of women that look trans, but none of them... It has a lot of second and third takes. After a drink, you'd go, huh? But it doesn't have a ton of...
Even the studio audience, often coached to cheer, felt hesitant. The show was in free fall. Meanwhile, Joe's podcast shattered more records. His breakdown of the defamation lawsuit hit #1 globally. He didn't need a PR team. His facts, humor, and clarity were his defense, and the public was eating it up. Commentators across the spectrum weighed in. Some called it a reckoning for legacy media, while others dubbed it a masterclass in how to hold TV giants accountable. Either way, the story wasn't fading. It was growing. When asked in an interview if he planned to settle, Rogan smiled and said, "Let's see what the truth brings." That one sentence sent shockwaves through every newsroom in America. He wasn't playing games, he was setting standards. The View's legal team eventually released a lukewarm response, filled with vague denials and ongoing review statements. But by then, the public wasn't buying it. Too many clips, too many contradictions, too many receipts. Even longtime defenders of the show started questioning its credibility. "I love these ladies, but they really messed up this time," one fan tweeted. And that shift in sentiment was the final warning bell for ABC. Insiders claimed some executives were now considering replacing key hosts to calm the firestorm. Others suggested canceling the show entirely if the legal battle couldn't be settled quietly. What once seemed unthinkable was suddenly on the table. Joe Rogan didn't set out to start a media war, but when attacked, he fired back with facts, strength, and a lawsuit so strong it turned the TV world upside down. The dragon joke that was meant to humiliate him became a national embarrassment for The View. In the end, Rogan proved that truth still has power and that mocking someone for views can come with a price tag you can't afford. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a media reckoning, live and televised for the world to see. So while The View scrambles to survive and ABC counts the cost, Joe Rogan is still sitting behind the mic, calm, collected, and completely undefeated. And this time, it's not a conspiracy, it's history.